Good evening. I'm Mark Evanier, and this is my friend Jim Brochu. Welcome to a webcast. We're going to be sitting here talking for a while. I've been doing these things for a couple of months now because since the lockdown started, this is like day 102 for me or something like that. I have found great joy in talking to people I haven't talked to in a while. And I thought, hey, let's put some of these on the web and let you folks eavesdrop on the kind of things I say to friends of mine. I have known Jim Brochu for about 40 years now.
Wow.
He is, and if there is anyone in this business world who knows more show business stories than I do, it is probably him.
It's
And
me.
that's right. Let's tell them how we met, Jim.
Why don't you start?
Okay, I was in 1980. I was the head writer of a short-lived variety show on NBC called Pink Lady and Jeff. And when we were casting for writers, we discovered that there were very few variety show writers in Hollywood.
They were all
Pardon?
They were all dead.
Yes. Well, yes. Yeah. I think one of the guys who came, I think, claimed to have written the Boss Hijack sketch or something like that.
That's it.
But we had a problem finding a writing staff. First of all, almost every writer who came in assumed that if they were a writer on the show, they got to be a supporting cast member on the show because that had happened with the Smothers Brothers and with Sonny and Cher. And, Saturday Night Live, Chevy Chase was hired as a writer and wound up being a movie star. A lot of people wanted to emulate that role model. And we didn't want to have the writers on the show because we had a limited writing budget. And we had also already started talking about hiring some full-time comedy players to be backup in sketches. So we made a decision not to let writers be in the sketches, and you'd be amazed how disappointed some of the people who came in were. They came in pitching ideas for their characters that they wanted to develop and do on the show, and we said, well, we want you to be a writer, and some of them had no material that did not involve their own characters that they claimed to own. And we had trouble we couldn't find a black writer to save our lives. We couldn't find a female writer to save our lives. And the producer of the show, a lady named Bonnie Dorr, with whom I was working, was the president of Women in Film, who was giving speeches complaining about TV shows and studios not hiring enough women. And we literally could not find a female variety show writer at that moment. The one or two who came in all informed us they would write for their own character, but not for anybody else's. So anyway, some friend of Jim's, I don't know who, maybe you do, called Bonnie and recommended we meet with you.
It was my agent.
Really? Okay. It was someone Bonnie knew.
Michael Perezzi and William Morris.
Oh, okay.
And from what I heard, they were looking for a playwright, somebody who worked in the theater, who might want to transition. Anyway, that's what I heard.
I had never heard that suggestion made. We just wanted people who could write funny sketches and knew how to incorporate music into this. So we saw the show as having a lot of music.
Mm-hmm.
And we had a parade of people who came in. I think we did about 6-7 days of meetings, maybe 10 a day, I would guess, 4 or 5 before lunch, 4 or 5 after. And a lot of those meetings went very fast because we told the people they probably could not be on the show, and they just lost interest. And one of them just got up and left. He said, "Well, I don't want to write for the show if I'm not going to be on it." And he left. That's right. So Jim came in, and this was late in the process. This is one of the last days we were doing this, and we budgeted for 6 writers total, and including myself and 2 others we'd already hired. So we were looking for three new people. And at that moment, we were looking at that moment, we were kind of looking for Buddy Sorrell. We were looking for a one-liner guy, a joke guy, somebody who, was for punch-ups and fat, funny lines. And that was not Jim. Jim came in, he was charming, he was funny, he was eloquent. And I kind of made a mental note, well, we're probably not going to hire this guy. He doesn't really fit what we need right now, but he's kind of interesting. And then because the next writer was not there yet, the next appointment, I walked Jim out and I said, well, we'll be in touch with you. We'll let you know what happens. Knowing in my head we were not going to hire him. And Jim said,
I live to grovel.
Yes, which is a line from A Funny Thing Happened Away at the Forum. which was my favorite play and my favorite musical, certainly. And I came back with another line from Forum, and pretty soon we were sitting in the outer office
In the lobby.
doing Hysterium and Pseudolus. And Jim mentioned that he had seen the original production with Zero Mostel six times, I think it was. Yeah. And I envied him, and we talked anyway. Just then the other writer showed up, and I said, "Well, thank you, Mr. Brochu. We'll be in touch with you somehow." Anyway, he left, and I thought, well, gee, it's too bad we're not going to hire that guy. So we talked the next couple more people. We tried to we picked out the people we wanted to hire. Our business affairs guys went to into negotiation with them for how much we would pay them. And Jim, you were fortunate that a couple of those guys had really lousy agents because they priced the writers too cheaply. And as finally the business affairs guy came to me and said, we've got money for one more writer. We thought we've got room for a seventh writer.
Really?
Yes. And you know, okay, well, this is what happened. And I turned to Bonnie and said, let's get that guy Brochu. Let's call him, because I think he would bring something. The fact that he liked Forum made an impression on me, and the fact that he was very knowledgeable about musical theater made an impression on me. And there was nobody else on the staff that we'd picked who had any real experience in musical theater.
It's interesting because, I had worked for the Crofts before. Pink Lady was my second show for the Crofts. And they knew that I held out for minimum. So, so salary wasn't going to be a big deal. No, worked. See, they kind of knew me a little bit from the Crofts Super Show where I wrote Wonderbug.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
A wonderful mutual friend of ours named Dwayne Poole, who I just adore, and he brought me on. So I was very happy to get that call. I remember it very much. And I remember my salary was $2,000 a show. And
wow.
I thought that was great money, wonderful money. And what was the best thing about it was the experience. And I remember one of the first things that we did is you and I wrote a parody of Hooray for Hollywood. I think it was for the very first show. And it was just a joy.
I guess so. Yeah. Well, the show was doomed before it went on the air.
Yeah, of course.
For about 90 reasons, not the least of which was that NBC had everything NBC was putting on was kind of doomed, and we were on Friday night when they had no hits whatsoever. But
we were in Dallas.
We were on opposite. We were opposite Dukes of Hazzard, and Dallas was on after that, I think.
Right.
But in the course of 6 shows, we got to work, first of all, in terms of guest stars with Sid Caesar, Jerry Lewis, Larry Hagman, Lorne Green, Red Buttons,
Benji. What are you talking about?
That's right.
We had Benji,
and we had a wonderful staff of people.
It was a joyful experience, but I got to tell you, out of it came one of the most embarrassing show business experiences of my life when I treated Roy Orbison like he was blind.
Oh,
yes. I'm blind. I'm an albino. Get your hands off me. I've been through doors, and I said, "Oh, Mr. Orbison, I'm so sorry, pretty woman."
That's what he sang on the show. He sang Pretty Woman. We had all the girl dancers.
Yes, he was a delightful, charming man, but Jesus Christ, I was so embarrassed.
And we got to work with Bert Parks.
I love Bert. Bert was a friend. Bert might have been a friend when he came on, but I adored Bert. He was a lovely, lovely man, and he had just been fired from the Miss America pageant, and he was hot because he had been fired. And we had Larry Hagman, who was the foulest-mouthed human being I have ever worked with in my life. A total charmer, though. And it was just a lot of fun. And those poor girls. Oh, dear Lord, those poor... Sweet.
We felt we had our stars, among their other limitations of not speaking English very well. They did not want to be there and they wanted to be in Japan full time, but they were being ferried back and forth.
Right.
They on weekends they would take a plane to Japan where they perform in front of these huge stadiums, to the capacity crowds.
Yeah.
And then they'd be put on a plane and come back. They'd have to come back here,
Right.
and literally during the week of rehearsals and taping, they would be falling asleep during rehearsals.
Yeah.
And we would occasionally have to keep writing them out of things so that they could have enough rehearsal time for the stuff that they had to be in.
And there was a darling man, remember Jonathan Lucas?
Jonathan Lucas, yes.
Who was their dialogue coach and would take them and by rote put the lines in. And of course, comedy, you change until they roll action, and then you change it after that. But with those two poor ladies, you couldn't change anything. And so the comedy started to fall on Sid. What a joy it was to work with my idol, Sid Caesar. And you and I got to know Sid off screen, which was a total honor. But
and while we were doing that show, and in the same complex where our offices were, taping on the stage next to us was a show called United States, produced by Larry Gelbart. And Gelbart was right down the hall from us. And Gelbart and Sid would go to lunch. I'd sneak off and go to lunch with Gelbart and Sid Caesar, and that's how I got to know Larry pretty well too.
I love that.
And we had a lot of amazing people on that show, and we had a few guest stars who showed up and then left. But I think Sally Struthers.
Really?
I think maybe you never met her. She came in, was about to do the show, and she left. Do you remember why Tony Randall didn't do the show?
No.
Here's what one of the problems of doing a variety show of like that is. You have to go to the agent and say, we'd like to hire your client, and they'd say, well, what's this show? Well, it's not on the air yet.
Somebody has to make a special appearance.
Okay, good.
There is Leo Katz.
Thank you, Leo.
I love you, Leo.
Leo does look kind of Jewish, yeah. So since they had never seen the show and didn't even know who the stars were, they said, well, send over some material and we'll read it. So we'd sit down and write a sketch for Tony Randall, for example. And before it was even sent to him, he would call up and cancel, like, I got another job. I don't want to do the show. I'm not available. In Tony Randall's case, what it was that his agent called up and said, Tony's interested in doing the show. I told him that these girls were huge fans of his. And Bonnie said, they probably don't know who he is. And the agent said, oh, don't tell me that. I already told them they were huge fans of his. And Bonnie said, well, the truth is they don't know who any of our guest stars are, really. They didn't know who Sid Caesar was. They didn't know who Donny Osmond was. They didn't know who Jerry Lewis was. Right. And anyway, the agent goes back to Tony Randall and says, I misunderstood. These girls had never heard of anybody in American show business. And Tony said, oh, I don't want to be part of a show starring people who don't know who I am.
Don't blame him.
We lost Tony there. Actually, we never really had him. But we had this problem where, you'd write a sketch for Tony Randall, and before it had even been sent to him, they'd come in and say to me, Tony's out. Can you send some material over to Dionne Warwick? And we'd say, well, we have to write something. Well, can you switch the Tony Randall sketch to Dionne Warwick?
Tony Randall switch.
Yeah, and such. We actually at one point wrote a sketch for Buddy Ebsen. Buddy Ebsen was going to do the show, and we came up with this idea for a sketch. First of all, I got to tell you that one of the problems was we were working so close to air date that we had to build the sets before we wrote the sketches, or before we got guest stars. So our art director, who was a fellow named Jeremy Railton, would come to me and say, what are you guys going to need for show 3? And I said, well, we're working on show 1 here. We don't know who show 3 is going to be. And he'd say, well, I've got to start working on the sets now. Our budget for sets is so low, we've got to bid them out early so we don't have to pay overtime charges. So I'd say, well, make up a gymnasium and a living room or something like that. And we'd write the sketches to fit whatever guests we could get. Anyway, so when Buddy Ebsen came up, we had the idea to do a roast of Abraham Lincoln with Buddy Ebsen as Abraham Lincoln. and we wrote the sketch. Actually, it was a pretty funny sketch, one of the better ones we had. And then Buddy Epson dropped out before we even set the material. Nobody ever read a lot of these sketches when they dropped out. We never had someone read the sketch and drop out. They drop out before they got the sketch. So now we've got a roast of Abraham Lincoln sketch that we like. And I say, well, who else we can get? And they suddenly say, oh, we think we've got Red Buttons. So we went, a roast, Red Buttons, great. And Red Buttons ended up playing
John Wilkes
I almost said Lee Harvey Oswald. Yeah, John Wilkes Booth, and then Jim Varney, who was in our supporting cast, played Abraham Lincoln. And you and I were in that sketch.
We certainly were in that sketch, and I remember writing a lot of that sketch, and I thought it was wonderful that by show 5 we had finally hit some kind of stride, that we were all working together very, very well. And there were 125 people working on that show, and the only 2 who didn't want to be there were the stars.
That's right, yes.
So it didn't work out very well. And I think everybody was kind of relieved when the show was canceled. I guess you always want to go on, but it was truly an amazing experience. And getting to know Bonnie Dorr, who became truly one of my best friends. And she and I shared the same birthday, a year apart. And I always called her my little sister. And she's left us now, way too young. But that was a good, and it was great to meet you and to be part of your life for the last 40 years.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, it was an amazing experience of bonding. The best thing we did on that show, unfortunately, nobody ever saw, was the rap party. We entertained at the rap party. The writers entertained at the rap party.
I forgot all about that. Was that ever taped?
No. We just did a live sketch on the stage for everybody, kind of a roast of the entire staff.
I remember the horrible director,
Art Fisher.
Oh, dear God, what a horrible man he was. He was just gloom and doom and nasty. And, he was the dark cloud on the set.
Yeah, he hated all of us. He hated the material, he hated the girls.
And they all know that he hated us.
Yeah, that was one of the...
Yeah, especially Jeff. He treated Jeff so poorly, I thought. And Jeff was a good guy and, doing the best with what he was given in an impossible situation. But for some reason, Art took it out on him. But as Betty Davis would say, Art was killed in a helicopter crash, wasn't he?
That's right. Yes, he was. Yes. No, we had a director who was forced to do the show on a contractual deal and hated every minute of it, and was always calling Fred Silverman in New York to say, I can save this show, fire everybody else and put me in charge.
No.
And
I wish you would finish that book you started. You sent me half of the book on Pink Lady, and you stopped writing just as I enter.
Yes, well, that's what it, stopped being interesting. No, it was. I wrote this. I started writing this book for fun, with all my remembrances of that show and some of the other variety shows I did before that. And at one point, I reached a stage where I was about to start saying some pretty bad things about a couple people at the network and on the staff, and I thought, I'm going to take a little breather before I write this. And I haven't really gotten back to it, but I'll finish it someday.
Good, you must. It's a very interesting story.
I should probably be doing it while I'm on lockdown here. But
think about the people who went on, who started on that show, like Sherry Eichen,
who I've interviewed here under the name Sherry Steinkellner.
Sherry, who married Billy Steinkellner, who was my poker playing partner for over 12 years. Still miss playing poker with them. And Sherry and I get to, we've never done it together, but we lecture on the same cruise ship. Our time in Hollywood. And in fact, I got off the ship in January, just the day that she got on. So hopefully they'll have us together. Hopefully there'll be a cruise industry in the next year.
But you were there, Jim. You can verify a couple of stories I've told that people...
I saw nothing.
Like, for example, how Larry Hagman did the show. How they got Larry Hagman to do the show.
I don't know, but I remember he didn't want to be there either.
Well, it happened. Yes, he did. He wanted to work with Sid Caesar. What had happened was that Mr. Hagman had this superstition of his. He would not speak on Sundays. He would whistle.
Right.
And Fred Silverman, who was at the network, we couldn't get guest stars. Nobody wanted to be on the show. We were begging for guest stars. And Fred Silverman said, "I'll get you Larry Hagman." It was typical that to get a big star, the president of NBC had to try to get someone from a CBS show, because this was literally the week he taped Pink Lady was the week they shot the episode where J.R. got shot. J.R. Ewing got shot.
Wow.
So Fred calls Larry at his home in Malibu on a Sunday, and Fred knows Larry does not speak on Sundays. And he calls him up and he says, "Larry, it's Fred Silverman at NBC. I know you don't speak, but I just can't wait. I want you to do a variety show this coming week. And they would need you Wednesday and Thursday and maybe Friday for a couple hours." And he tells him, and he mentions that Sid Caesar is on the show. And it turns out that one of Mr. Hagman's childhood fantasies was being Howie Morris or Carl Reiner and doing sketches.
Oh, that's funny.
Sid Caesar. And so he says, "We will pay you. Our guest star fee for this show is $7,500. And Larry has already decided himself he's going to do it no matter what the money is. So he gives a whistle that to him means yes. And Fred thinks it's the whistle for no. And he says, "Okay, $10,000. And Larry gives the whistle for yes. And Fred thinks it's the whistle for no. And he says 12,500. And Larry gives the whistle for yes, and Fred thinks it's the whistle for no, and he says 15,000. That's as high as I can go. I really am not allowed to go any higher than that. And Larry gives the whistle for yes. Fred thinks it's the whistle for no, and he thinks, well, what can I give you? Listen, you got a production company. How about if I give you a commitment for 2 TV movies, which can be backdoor pilots? This is something which, if this was a pilot, became a series, it could be worth millions of dollars."
Yeah.
Larry says, "I'll take it." Breaks it. Don't you remember Larry telling us this story? Is it not familiar now? I thought you remembered this story anyway. So Larry comes in and does the show, and I thought he was wonderful. He was
he was
out and such, and we got great. Now, as it turns out, about a year and a half later, one of the reasons he agreed to do the show was that he was it was the end of the last show of the season of Dallas, and he was going to hold out for a whole new contract and millions of dollars to do another season. So he liked the idea of those 2 TV movie commitments, because he figured that if he somehow doesn't return to Dallas, he can star in those 2 TV movies and maybe one of them will become a series. That was his plot. Very, very shrewd man. So I ran into him. He ended up making the deal to come back to Dallas for millions and millions of dollars. And I ran into him at NBC about 2 years later, and he remembered me. And he told me how much he loved working with Sid Caesar, how it was one of the high points of his life. And he says, "I love doing that so much. I don't mind I didn't get paid." And I said, "What do you mean didn't get paid?" He said, "I never got paid for that show. After, I did it, my lawyer calls up and says, 'What about my 2 TV movie commitments?' And by this point, Fred Silverman was gone, and NBC said, 'What TV movie commitments? We have no record of TV movie commitments.' So he didn't get the 2 TV movies, and he didn't get paid. So I said to him, 'Well, listen, let me call Marty Krofft. Maybe we can at least pay you for the, you should get union scale at least.' He said, 'No, don't bother with it. I just made, you wouldn't believe how much money I'm making off Dallas now. I don't need the money.' He says, 'You know what I do need? Can you get me a video cassette of the show? I didn't tape it that night. I missed it somehow. I would love to have a video tape of the show. I'll call it even if they get that.' And I said, 'I guarantee you'll get it.' So he scribbles out his address for me on a card, and he hands it to me. I remember he said, 'Now, if you lose that, just call the National Enquirer. They send a nice man over every night to go through my trash cans.' And he told me that he was planning one of these days to just go buy a ton of gay porn and put it in the trash cans for the Enquirer guy to find."
That's funny.
So now I called Marty Krofft. Marty had a video cassette of the show, messenger to Hagman. A week later, I get a call from Marty's secretary, Trudy, and says, "Larry Hagman's office just called. They want your address. He wants to send you a thank you something." I said, "Sure, give it to him." So now I remember that girl who was on the show, the dancer Bridget. I remember Bridget. Okay. Bridget was staying with me when the package arrived. And it was a big round thing. I opened it up, this big package. I was thinking he was going to send me like an autographed picture or something like that. He sent me this big package. We opened it up, and it was a cowboy hat. It was a white Stetson cowboy hat, I think from what was the name of that big company in Beverly Hills? One of the big department stores in Beverly Hills. No, it was Abercrombie and Fitch. Abercrombie and Fitch. And I don't wear hats. I didn't wear hats then. And I look stupid in a cowboy hat. I look stupid in most hats. But Bridget looked good in everything. So I gave it to her. I said, here, this is for you. And it was too big for her. But there was a slip in it that said, if this is the wrong size, bring it back. We'll exchange it. So I said, this is my gift to you, Bridget. You go ahead and take the thing back to Abercrombie & Fitch and get yourself the right size. So the next day, I'm sitting in my office working. I get this panic call from Bridget. She's hysterical. It's like Martians have landed. She's so upset. I think something terrible has happened. And she says, I said, calm down. What is it? She says, it's a $1,400 hat. The hat cost $1,400 and change. This is 1980 or 81. That's a lot of money. It's a lot of money now, but it was a lot of money then.
Yeah, sure.
So she says, what do I do? I said, well, see if they'll let you, buy a pair of cufflinks and take the rest in change, the rest of the money in cash. So she bought another cowboy hat for $200, which to me looked exactly the same. And she took the rest. She took $1,200 in cash. She comes over. I looked at the hat and it looked to be the same. And makes the point. Mr. Hagman could have sent me a $200 hat, and I would have been very impressed. He sent me a $1,400 little note. Said, "You're one of the good guys." That's what he said in the note. Oh. Bridget wanted to give me the $1,200, and I said, "No, I gave you the hat. You get the $1,200." And we fought about that for 10 minutes. She said, "No, you take that. You take that." Finally, we made a compromise. She took the money, but for the next several months, whenever we ate dinner out, she would pay. So for the next couple of months, every time we went to a restaurant, the waiter would bring me the check, and I'd say, "No, I always make the woman pay." And Bridget would start faking crying, going, "Me, I have to pay again? Why don't you ever pay?" I'd say, "Shut up and pay the check." And she'd pull out the money and start acting like she was crying. I got such hateful looks from waiters.
Restaurants, I'm sure.
But she loved it. That was more fun than the money, I think. We kept playing that little trick on servers. Anyway, I thought you remembered that story about Hagman. We spent a lot of time talking about it. I think he told the story in front of you.
He could have. I remember talking to him about his mom, who he didn't really seem to want to talk very much about.
Yeah, I remember what he loved to talk about was the movie Failsafe.
Oh, what a great movie!
Yeah, he was a fascinating guy.
He's the Russian interpreter with Henry Fonda.
Anyway, I'm gonna break here into the chat room here for a minute. Here we have a few. Hello to all these people saying howdy here.
Who's here?
Well, let's see. James Toby, right? Jim, was it Mark that you told the elephant story about?
Well, isn't that funny? Hi, James. Hi, James in Los Angeles, originally from Omaha, Nebraska. Yeah, it was. I'm not sure what episode it was. It was close to the beginning, but I remember Mark and I was.
It was the same show the Lincoln sketch was in. It
was a little bit later, but I remember you saying something like, "You want to see the power a head writer has?" And I said, "Yeah." And you called somebody in the office and he said, "Get me an elephant."
That's right. Yeah, I did that. We were so punchy from working around the clock on that show. And what had happened was
it was Art Nouveau's
Culture City. Art Nouveau's Culture City.
And here comes the fucking elephant into the parking lot. He didn't want to be there any more than anybody else did.
Hey, that elephant had the best agent on the show, I think. The best manager. The elephant wanted script approval. No, what happened was, I would say, like I mentioned to the art director, build us a gymnasium set, build us a living room set, and they'd just go build it. So I said to all the writers one day, I said, we can do anything we want here. We could get an elephant. And I called in Pat Davis, who's the associate producer. I said, "Pat, we need an elephant for the show next week." And he said, Indian or African? I said, yeah, whatever you like, just the biggest elephant you can. And they booked an elephant, and we had no plans for it.
No,
so we stuck it in a sketch, and the elephant decided to ad lib on the set.
Yes, and it was the funniest thing that happened that day.
That's right. So anyway,
yes, John, yes, James, it was beloved Mark Evanier who and the elephant story.
Yeah, Shelley Goldstein says,
"Hi, Shelley."
Yeah, 2,000 per show or per week. It was by the show we paid you, didn't it?
Yeah, but it was one show per week, so it was the same.
Well, we were there more than 6 weeks on that show. It was 6 episodes. I think we did 6 episodes in 10 weeks or something like that. And because the girls weren't available every week, they were
really.
They were anyway. Yeah, I think I was on that show for like 5 months. I was on before you, and I think I was on after you left, just finishing up stuff, and it was.
Yeah, I don't remember if it was per show or per week.
No, it was per show. I'm pretty sure. Yeah, I was paid by the.
That's right. Per show.
I was paid by the show. Robert Rose said, I just happened a few nights to read Mark's Larry Hagman story in his blog. Look it up if you haven't.
Okay.
I just told. Shelley Goldstein also wants you to know that the beard is looking fabulous. Now, tell us about the beard. Tell us about the beard. You started this when
I started this on March the 12th. I was opening that night in an off-Broadway musical called A Class Act with words and music by Ed Cleban, who wrote Chorus Line. And it was a wonderful show. We had done a brilliant dress rehearsal with a cast of 8. And I was the old fart in a group of 20-year-olds who are 7 of the most talented kids I ever worked with. And we were just a wonderful, happy company. And then at 4 o'clock the afternoon of March 12th, Broadway shut and off-Broadway shut and everything was down. And so I said to myself, I am not going to shave until Broadway reopens again. So it's now been, I'm not sure how many days since March 12th, but this is the condition of my beard. And I shall look like Gandalf probably when Broadway finally reopens, which I understand sadly is not going to be until next year. So New York is like a ghost town. It's very strange to walk around Times Square and see so few people. The restaurants are closed. Some reopened today with sidewalk seating, but it's not the same. And as Mark knows, we live on 42nd Street, right at 9th Avenue, with a wonderful terrace that overlooks the river. And 42nd Street, when you look down and you see 2 cars, you know it's not the New York you were raised in. So, this too shall change. But right now, it's kind of sad to see now the ramifications. I mean, this was a nuclear bomb that went off without the explosion. With all the ramifications that have happened to all the professions and businesses. But we're strong. This too shall pass. Now let's laugh about something.
All right, let's pick something to laugh at. And let's talk a little bit more. We'll tell a few more Pink Lady stories, and we'll get off the subject.
All right.
We had a great cast. We had some great dancers on the show. We had some good people. We had no budget. We had very little budget on the show, and we had Sid Caesar, and we had Hugh Hefner. There's another person we had. It was very strange that one day, I come to work and Marty says, "You're due at the Playboy Mansion in 2 hours to talk to Hugh Hefner about being on the show." And I, quickly ran home and switched to my fancier car, and we had a lot of, and I got to write music for that show. I ended up writing songs for that show.
Really?
Yes, I wrote the Cheap Shot magazine song, and I wrote a couple of other things we did. Because there was just no budget for bringing in another, a special musical material guy. So I wrote the song, most of the songs on there, and it was just very interesting to do it and to just kind of realize that it really didn't matter what we did. The show was going to go 6 episodes,
right?
No matter what. The girls weren't even available. If Network had wanted show 7, they were booked solid. We couldn't have done show 7 for another 8 months or something like that, if then. And boy, were they happy when we did the last show. Remember how happy they were at that rap party?
And they were. I got to tell you, I was in Japan, maybe about 6 or 7 years ago. Now, Pink Lady was 1980.
Yeah.
And to be in Japan, what, 34 years later, and I mentioned to somebody that I had worked with Pink Lady. You worked with Pink. It was like I had worked with the Beatles. All of a sudden there was this incredible cachet of working with these two darling girls. They were as sweet as could be. Me and Kay couldn't have been nicer, and just didn't want to be there.
Yeah, didn't want. There were days when we didn't want to be there either. It's okay. Um, now, let's go back in your life a little bit here, Jim. Well, how old were you when you decided you wanted to be in show business?
Very young. Let me start by saying very young. I had always been attracted to the Catholic Church. I came from a very religious Catholic family. The masses, all the devotions, the services, being steered into being an altar boy, became the bishop's private altar boy. My pastor, Bishop Ed Riley, wonderful guy. But what I soon learned to, I was attracted not to the religion, not to the philosophy of the spirituality. I was attracted to the costumes, the scenery, the makeup, the props, the lights, the music. It was a show. Sunday Mass was a show. There was costumes, there was lights, there was choirs, there was pretty much chorus girls. But still, I had that attraction to be a priest. And not only that, I knew I was destined to be the first Brooklyn-born pope. Absolutely a certainty. When other kids were out practicing baseball, I was practicing how I would come out onto the balcony of St. Peter's and bless the crowd below. I saw my first Broadway show when I was 11, and it was a drama. I was home from school sick one afternoon, and Ciro Richard was on TV on a talk show talking about his play called Visit to a Small Planet by Gore Vidal. Now, I'm 11 years old, but I hear planet, and all I was interested in was space and travel and Mars and moons and astronauts and all that. And I thought, Visit to a Small Planet, I got to see this. So I say to my father, I want to see this play called Visit to a Small Planet. Well, he thinks this 11-year-old boy is some erudite intellectual who wants to go see a Gore Vidal play. So we take my grandmother at the Booth Theater, and I remember the lights going down. And Cyril Richard, Captain Hook, was right in front of me, and it was wonderful. It was at the Booth Theater, and afterwards I just felt an attraction. But I was still into the church. I was still going to be a pope. If anybody asked me what I was going to be, it was a priest. Cut to June 20th, 1959. It was a Saturday. And my father had tickets to go see his friend Ethel Merman in a show called Gypsy. Ethel's father worked with my father's company, Allen and Company. My dad was on Wall Street. He was a stockbroker. And so he knew Ethel. Dad was a widower. She was divorced. I think they went out maybe once or twice, nothing very serious. But Ethel's father, Ed, was a very close friend of my father. So we had Ethel's house seats at the Broadway Theater, E100 and 102, fifth row center on the aisle. I had never been to a musical. I didn't know what it was going to be about. Well, that show started. She came down the aisle right next to me. Sing out, Louise. And for the next 2 hours, it was the first real religious, spiritual experience I ever had in my life. I was transformed, sitting in that seat, and I knew I couldn't get up after it was over. I just sat there. Then all of a sudden, Mr. Zimmerman comes, and he's standing in the aisle next to us, and he says, "Come on, guys, Ethel's waiting for us." So he brings us backstage. The curtain was down. Ethel was standing there talking to the stage manager, the ghost light over in the corner. She saw her father and my father. "Hiya, Pop. Hiya, Pete. You must be Jimmy." I couldn't speak. I was Ralph Cramden. Hama. And she talked to them for a couple of seconds. Then she said, "What are you going to be when you grow up?" And at that moment, the curtain of the Broadway theater rose. And there was the dark, empty theater with the ushers cleaning up old programs and cleaning up candy wrappers. And I just looked out and I said, "I'm going to do this, Miss Merman." That's nice. She was off to someplace else, but that was the day that changed my life. And I got home and I got all the kids in the neighborhood together and we put on a show. We put on a review and we raised $354 for the Cancer Society. We had a theater in our apartment building that sat 300 people. And I wrote, produced, directed, and starred in the Flag Court Follies of 1959. Thank you very much. And then eventually I got to work with Merman. I got to know her pretty well. And, oh, there's me and Ethel. That's my 30th birthday. That was taken in Dinah Shore's dressing room in Los Angeles. And that night we went out for dinner to this. It was my birthday, so there was like 6 of us. Let's go out for dinner. So we went out for dinner to, I think it was Trader Vic's, which was in the bottom of the Beverly Hills, one of those hills of
Beverly Wilshire.
Beverly Wilshire. So we go over there, we're going down the stairs, and this lady is coming up the stairs, and she looks and she goes to Ethel. Oh yeah, and Ethel says, "Fucking Lily Holman," and she keeps going down the stairs. Now we sit at the table, and the first words out of Ethel's mouth, "I don't share." Whatever she ate, that was going to be what she ate. She wasn't taken from anybody else's plate. I don't share. And so that was Ethel. And she was really a muse in my life for a long time. She was a very special lady.
Okay. Anyway, now tell me. So now you saw Gypsy, and what year was this?
1959. I was 12 years old.
Okay. Now let's jump ahead to seeing Funny Thing on Boy to the Forum, which I envy you having seen, because I love that show, but I never got to see Zero in it.
Well, yeah. Dad, once again, being on Wall Street, one of his clients was David Burns. So Davy Burns got his tickets for Forum. And I guess my father thought by 62, I was 15 at the time. So I was a little more. He wouldn't let me meet Davy Burns because Davy had the foulest mouth in the history of show business. Dear, wonderful man. So
for those who don't know, Davy Burns was in the original production of Forum.
Davy Burns was the original Banjo in The Man Who Came to Dinner, the original mayor in Music Man, Van de Gelder and Dolly, the original Gregory Solomon in The Price. He 2 Tony Awards for Best Supporting Actor. He was Mayor Shin in The Music Man. He won for that. And I mean, he had an extraordinary Broadway career and one of the most beloved figures in Broadway history. So, but I had met Davy very briefly when he was doing Music Man, but my father wouldn't let me. But now this was Forum. And I remember going backstage to see him, and he said something. I was just in awe because Ray Walburn and Jack Guilford were in the dressing rooms next to him. And there they were in their costumes. And, you know, I was just so in love with show business. So he said, and I was going to military school at the time. I was at a boarding school. So I had a West Point type uniform on. So at the end of this meeting, Davey said, well, don't forget, you're always welcome. I said, are you serious, Mr. Burns? He said, absolutely. Well, you just come back whenever you want. Well, that next Friday, I was back seeing the show and waiting to go backstage to see Davey. So I went back and I made a wrong turn and bang, I smashed right into Zero Mostel, who had just come off the stage. It was like he had taken a shower. He was in that costume and it was soaked. I'm having a little frog. Excuse me, please.
Okay.
So it was a little soaked. So he looked at me in my uniform and he said, who are you, General Nuisance? And I said, I'm Mr. What are you doing here? Why are you here? I said, I'm here to see Mr. Burns, my friend. Well, you never come to see me. I said, why don't you come to see me? And I said, well, I'm seeing Mr. Burns. Well, you better come to see me when the next time you come. And he was gone. And I mean, it was like being hit by the proverbial rhinoceros. And so anyway.
he was a good rhinoceros, too.
The next week, I went back to see the show again. If Davey said I was always welcome, I just about moved into that dressing room at the Alvin Theater. So I went back to the third week, And I went up to see Davey first, and he had someplace to go with his wife. So I said, well, I'll go down and see Mr. Mostel. So I went back downstairs across the stage to where his number one dressing room was. And he was reading the riot act to one of the proteins. His name was David Evans, who eventually went into Hello, Dolly. Wonderful chorus guy. And he was screaming at this kid. I mean, screaming at him. How dare you? If you ever do that again, I'll throw you in the fucking orchestra pit, and I'm the star of this show. And all that, get out of here. And so David just ran away. And this was Zero. And get out of here. Oh, Sergeant Brochu, so lovely to see you. I mean, and once again, I was standing there going, homina, homina, homina. Gotta find the tissue. Excuse me. Tissue.
Good.
So I got to know Zero, and I got to know everybody in that cast pretty well, except for John Carradine. And John Carradine had a bit of a problem with the bottle, and he would show up. Oh, let's say he'd had a few. And Jimmy Bronson was the stage manager. And I remember I used to stay at the theater until half hour. And back then it was 8 o'clock. The shows didn't start till 8:30. And I remember at half hour, I was going out the door just as John Carradine was coming in for the show. And you could tell he was plotzed. And Jim looked at me and he said, I didn't smell anything. Did you? I said, no, I'm out of here. And then I got to see it so many times. And that production we saw with Walter Matthau making an 8-second appearance.
Yeah, just tell them about that.
Doodless. You tell them.
There was a charity production. I think
Variety Arts, wasn't it?
Variety Arts Theater, one night only. And they advertised Walter Matthau.
Wait a minute, my television just went on.
Really? Oh, maybe it's more interesting than this show. Let's take a look and see what that is.
Yeah, I could see that he loved working on cards.
There. I'm back.
Good. There was a charity. It was for a friend of mine, Don Siegel, was directing it. Don Siegel, people will the folks in the room here who know comic books will know Don Siegel was a comic book writer also. He wrote the first issue of The Creeper for DC, and he became a good friend of mine. And he wrote a lot of other comic books too. Anyway, Don was the producer of it. It was done for a Jewish charity that he was involved with, and he had persuaded Walter Matthau to make an appearance as Prologus. Now, those of us who know the show know the Prologus has about a one-line part. He makes one speech, and traditionally, whoever's playing Pseudolus plays Prologus, and vice versa. Well, this time they split the roles up. Walter Matthau made an entrance in a toga, looking extremely Walter Matthau. We were in the front row, you and I, and we had Bonnie with us.
But didn't he have street clothes? It's like he threw a toga on over a suit.
I think he may have, yeah. But he, came out with that incredible face of his.
Yeah.
And he delivered the opening lines, and then he went home.
Yeah.
And then Danny Dayton, who had been playing the show all over the years, a lot of times, and had actually directed a lot of productions of it.
Yeah.
Danny took over.
Danny was married to a bombshell called Dagmar.
Yes, the infamous Dagmar.
And Danny was Zero's standby for the show. And they're two of the most different physical appearances. Zero was this huge fat guy, and Danny Dayton was like a matchstick. He was as skinny as could be. You've seen Danny on television. He did a lot of wonderful character parts.
Yeah, he made it. One of the things that always fascinated me is that there are people who do a Broadway show, and then they basically make a living for the rest of their lives doing different productions of that around the country.
Right, sure.
Danny Dayton was doing for him for the rest of his life, someplace, somewhere, and he frequently directed other productions of it. The same way Paul Lipson did Fiddler on the Roof forever after that, and certain other guys.
Love Paul Lipson. When I was, I got to do Tevye, and I was going away to do it. And I called Paul and I said, can I come see the show? And so he walked me in. And afterwards, I went back to his dressing room and I said, Paul, you taught me a lot. He said, what not to do, right? And because I thought it was just it was like a couple of weeks before it closed, and it was so tired.
He had done that show more than anybody in the history of mankind because he was Zero's understudy originally, and then he went on. And he would play Laser Wolf, and he'd play Tevye occasionally.
Yeah, he was Revka the bookseller at one point. But yes, he stood by for Zero. But I have a wonderful fiddler story that I knew Zero was going to do it and wanted desperately to see it. And I was going to college. I had just gone to Carnegie Mellon, and it was the first week we were at Carnegie Mellon. And I struck up a friendship with this fellow who was in the music department. He was going to be piano composition. That was his major. Wonderful guy who also loved theater. We would go into the music room, and he would sit down and play anything you asked him from memory. And we do Rose's Turn and do crazy stuff. So anyway, my father got us 2 tickets for the second night of Fiddler on the Roof, September 23rd, 1964. So we flew from Pittsburgh to the Imperial Theater, and I went up, got the ticket from the window, opened it up. There was 1 ticket. I was panicked. And I said, this is S22. There's 1 ticket. We need 2 tickets. So we went to the broker who was right on 45th Street. He said, your father said 1. I said, no, I have my friend. And he said, this is the biggest hit in town. I said, I don't know. You got it. Well, I don't know where he pulled this ticket out, but was A105, first row center. So I took A105 and I said to my friend, your last name begins with S. You're sitting in S22. So afterwards, I was able to bring him back and introduce him to Zero. And he brought me upstairs to introduce me to Maria Karnilova, who had played Golda. And next to her was her husband, the great George S. Irving. So afterwards, we went up to Times Square. We were both so moved about what we had seen. And he said, I know what I want. He said, I want 3 shows running on Broadway at the same time. And I said, well, you know, that's never going to happen. I said, so do I. So anyway, his name, my best friend from college, his name is Stephen Schwartz. And yeah, he did have 3 shows running on Broadway at the same time.
Yeah. Wow. That's a good story.
Yeah.
That's terrific. Anyway, now you saw Zero in Fiddler. You saw Zero in Forum.
Yes.
You see him in any other shows?
I saw him in Ulysses in Nighttown at the Winter Garden Theater. He was quite wonderful. I missed Rhinoceros. I'd started going to the theater shortly after he had done Rhinoceros. But no, those were the only. And then, of course, I've seen him in all the films that he did, you know, especially The Front, which is just a startlingly great film about that terrible time in our history.
Okay. Now let's step ahead here. We're going out of sequence here. We've talked about how you were friends with Zero Mostel. Let's talk about how you became Zero Mostel.
All right.
When did you write?
Out of sequence, though.
All right. When did you write Zero Hour?
I started writing it, I think, around 2005. It was 2005, and I had wanted to do Zero for the longest time. I identified with him. I did his parts. I understood what he went through, and I thought I did. And then I started to read his anything that had been written about him, and saw the obstacles that this man overcame as an actor, as a Jew, as a person, as a man. He almost lost his leg in a bus accident. There was the House Un-American Activities Committee, him being abandoned by his parents for marrying Shiksa. And I thought, boy, this is the stuff of great drama. So I started to put it together, and I started to talk to people who knew him. Charlotte Ray gave me an awful lot of information, who I loved. And then Piper Laurie, who was my friend, I started showing it to her, and she became a wonderful editor. And eventually she became the director of the piece. So I started to do a series of readings of it in late 2005. And the first one, I knew we had something. And so I was inviting somebody to see a second reading of it. It was like at a cocktail party. And I said, come see this reading I'm doing of a show I wrote about Zero Mostel. And like a guy 2 people over said, "Wait a minute, wait, that sounds interesting. I run the West Coast Jewish Theater. Can I come to the reading?" And I said, "Yeah, of course." So he came to the second reading and offered to produce it at intermission. And
only at intermission? Couldn't he produce the whole show or just the intermission?
He was going to produce intermission. So, but he wanted a theater that had a good lobby. It's the funniest thing. So anyway, we signed on to do 6 weeks, and I think we ran for 20. We had an enormous extension, and then it got the attention of a lot of producers across the country, and I started this kind of a quest across the United States. Did it in Florida and all over the country, San Francisco, and each place we learned a little bit more. And then did it in Washington. That was the last stop before we went to New York. And
now I saw it in Los Angeles at the Las Palmas Theater.
That's right. Yeah.
Where was that in the history of the show?
That was the very first production.
Okay.
That was the very first production. Yeah.
Well, I remember when you made your entrance, looking a lot like this. There was a certain gasp from the audience, because while you didn't look exactly like Zero, you somehow had his body movements and attitude on stage, and his unusual hair. How long did it take you to get into that character each night?
Probably about an hour. Yeah, the hair. I had a lot more hair back then. In fact, I lost a lot of hair doing it. When I finished writing the play, I sent it to Josh Mostel because I didn't want it to be a surprise to him, and he and I didn't know Josh really. So I said, "Would you read it?" And he did, and he wrote me back, and he said, "Zero would not have said capiche, and you spelled Plautus wrong." He said, "Other than that, I have no problem with it." And
That's
I
pretty
said,
good.
So then I'm on tour with the show, and I get to Toronto, and the producer picks me up at the airport, and he said, "Our opening is going to be wonderful. We have a whole Zero Mostel art exhibit." Because Zero considered himself an artist more than an actor or anything else. He said, "We have about 25 of Zero's paintings that are going to be in the lobby." And I said, "Well, that's great." He said, "And Josh Mostel is coming up tomorrow to open the exhibit and see and for the opening night." And my heart sunk because I really didn't know. This is 6 years later, and I didn't know if I wanted Josh to see it. He said, "We've set up a bunch of interviews for you and Josh to do tomorrow on TV and radio, and be in front of your hotel at 9:00, and Josh will come and you'll go do this together." So anyway, sure enough, the car pulls up, and Josh is sitting on 2/3 of the back seat of the cab, and he put out his hand to shake it, and he said, "I'm not seeing the show tonight." I said, "Josh, I totally understand." He said, "Well, let's go do these things." So we went to do these interviews, and we bonded. We absolutely bonded. And then we went out for a 3-hour lunch together. And at the end, I dropped him off at the hotel, and he put out his hand. He said, "I'm seeing the show tonight." And he was the first one on his feet.
Great.
And shortly after that, he came over to the apartment, and he gave me a picture of Zero. That was Zero's favorite picture of himself. And it's a rather large picture taken at the rehearsal of Fiddler on the Roof. So that made me very happy that Josh approved of the play.
Did he approve of the content of the play specifically, or your portrayal? Or what did he like best about it?
He approved all of it. He said, "I never thought."
I don't approve it, but what did he like best about it?
He never thought. I just saw the cat behind me.
Yes.
He said he never thought anybody could get his father, and he said, "I did it." He said there were times that it was so spooky that he thought he was in the room with his father. And he loved the play. He said the essence of the play and what I wrote about the family and what he went through was all there. He didn't. I don't think it's giving away too much to say Josh was not a big fan of his dad.
Yeah.
They had a very, very strange relationship. And he told us a couple of stories of Them running around the dining room table with a knife at each other. So Zero was a very volatile man. But no, Josh, and that was the greatest thing when he said it was my performance, and the fact that he was the first one on his feet that night.
Yeah. William Graff asks, did you originally open Zero Hour at the Arena Theater in Hollywood?
Did you originally open Zero at the Arena Theater? It was the Egyptian Theater. It was behind the Egyptian Arena thing, I think it was called. It was right opposite Michelli's.
Yeah.
It was on Las Palmas, I think.
Well, I thought you saw it did at the Las Palmas Theater. That's what I remembered.
I don't think it was called Las Palmas. I think it was called the Egyptian Studio Theater.
Really? Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, but it was...
I remember taking Carolyn in there, and I walked in, and a man came up to me and hugged me, and it was Steve. Oh. It was the first time I met Steve, and I don't know how he recognized me. And he was, out there kind of working the crowd, because you had a lot of friends there that night and greeting them all. And
was it opening
such?
Night?
No, I don't think it was opening night. I think it was very early in the run. I don't think it was opening night. But what I remember, and now you'll understand this, is when you go see a friend of yours in the show, you can't help but think, oh, what if it stinks? What am I going to do?
Right.
What if it's awful? Because everybody, is capable of that. And I remember, thinking, I told Carolyn when we went in, I said, I hope this is wonderful, because we're going to have to see Jim afterwards, and I don't want to say anything awful to him. And about 4 or 5 minutes in, I turned to her and I said, we have nothing to worry about. It was about 5 minutes before I went, okay. This is I didn't know how good it was going to be at that point, but I knew I wouldn't have to couch my words carefully.
You know who saw the show and loved it?
Who was that?
Barbara.
Barbara?
I didn't tell you this story?
No, you didn't tell me this story.
I'll tell you the story. There was a fellow involved with the show whose name I'm not going to say, but he was going to produce it. And I'll tell you later, because I know you know who he is. One of the greatest guys in the history of show business. But he just couldn't get the show on. And I adore him. But his best friend and his wife's best friend were Barbara and Jim Brochu. So she made arrangements to come. It was a big secret thing. She didn't show up. Would you tape the show for her? So he brings in 2 professional cameras, and he videotapes the show. And the next week, they all go on Barry Diller's yacht for a little vacation, and I'm the entertainment. And I said, did she like? He said she went nuts. She said the first 10 minutes, she was really edgy and itchy and oozhy. But as soon as it got to like the serious part, she said, you got her. She wants you to come to the concert. So Barbara invites me to the concert in Florida, flies me there to hang out with her. I mean, this is surreal. So I get to Fort Lauderdale, and they were filming the close-ups of this concert for the DVD. So it was, I got there very late. So it's the next day. We go over to the Bell Center, 17,000 people, which Trump couldn't fill up either. But anyway, she was doing the close-ups for the album for this DVD. So she sang from 2:30 in the afternoon to 6:30 at night. And then she did the full concert. So after she did the first thing is when I went back and was introduced and hung out. Oh, she said, you're so brilliant. You know how brilliant you are? And I said, oh, Barbara, this is surreal that you're. She said, well, who wrote the play? I said, well, I wrote the play. Oh, my God, I didn't realize that you're more brilliant than I thought you were. So we all hang out, and then it's time for the concert. I had a spectacular seat. And so afterwards, I went back to the dressing room. I had my lanyard that says all access, and went back to her dressing room. And there was only 6 of us in there. It was this couple, Brolin, myself, and Linda Richmond. You know the
yes, yeah, the Mike Myers character.
This was the real one.
The real one, yeah, okay.
The real one. So she's sitting there, and then so I'm standing next to Streisand, and she said, "Did you hear? Did you hear during the concert somebody yelled at Barbara, you're a bitch?" I said, yes, that was me. and thank God she laughed. So she was just delightful. She didn't want to have a picture, but she autographed a wonderful program to me, talking about how much she loved the show. Excuse me, I'm just tubercular.
Okay.
What's next?
Right. Now you have. Well, it's been a while since you've done the show.
Yes, I closed the show in January of 2019 in Arizona, in Tucson, and that's it.
Will you ever do it again?
No, I have hung up my Zero shoes.
Okay. Does a recording of the whole show exist?
Yes, at Lincoln Center.
Is there a copy anywhere else?
No, but they taped it for Lincoln Center.
Could I borrow Barbara's copy and see it?
Well, there's a lot of it on YouTube. I guess I could put together something, but
no, I saw it once, and I wish I had seen it again.
This is enough.
And I remember you telling me that it got better afterwards. In your opinion, that
it did.
And I never got to see it in the final.
Yeah,
form.
I mean, it didn't get worse. I know that.
Yeah, the thing that most people I talk to remember about it is the two scenes. One is the testimony before the Senate committee, and the other is the story about on Forum when they brought Jerry Robbins in.
Yeah.
Can you tell the Jerry Robbins story for people who don't know it? Because it's a fascinating story.
Actually, before he died, I spent some time with Hal Prince, and he told me the story, and I wasn't telling it exactly right in the show, but Hal disabused me of what happened. It wasn't huge. Forum was out of town. It was in Washington, and the show opened with Davy Byrne singing a song called "Love Is in the Air." Love is in the air, quite clearly. People everywhere act queerly, and it was the wrong song to open this crazy burlesque show. So they knew they were in trouble. The first 3 rows of the National Theater were all that people sat in. There were 1,200 seats, and they were empty, but Hal said that cast gave it 100%, and every night they played it like it was a packed house until help was on the way. So finally, George Abbott said, who was directing the show, he said, "You better get George Abbott. I can't do this." And of course, what he meant was get Jerry Robbins. Well, Jerry was going to be the original director of the show, and then things came in the way. He knew this wasn't a long-term commitment, nor a great deal of work. And so he said, "I'll do it." However, there were 2 people in the cast. One was Zero and the other was Jack Guilford. Now, Robbins had named Jack Guilford's wife to the House Un-American Activities Committee. And of course, Zero had been blacklisted, and this was one of his first jobs ever. So Hal Prince knew that this was going to be quite a contretemps, and he wanted to go to Zero and make sure there wasn't going to be holy hell and that they could work together. And so he knocked on Zero's door. And the way I had been telling it is that he and George Abbott had gone. And Hal said, absolutely not. He said George Abbott was a chicken shit. And as soon as he knew he had to do that, he was out of the theater. So he left it to Hal to go down and tell Zero. He said, "We want to bring in Jerry Robbins." And Zero said, "Do I have to eat with him?" And Hal said, "No." He said, "Do I have to shake his hand?" He said, "No." He said, "Will you work with him?" He said, "Of course I'll work with him." He said, "We of the left do not blacklist." And that was that. And Jack Guilford wanted to quit. And Zero said, "If you do that, you're going to be blacklisting yourself." So so the next day, Zero said, and in they came. He said, and there was Hal Prince and George Abbott and Jerry Robbins. See no evil, hear no evil, and evil. And all Zero said was, "How you doing, loose lips?" And that kind of broke the tension, and they were able to work together. And of course, they worked together in Fiddler and beautifully without even speaking to each other. but it was traumatic. But they got through it.
Did you ever see the Phil Silvers production of Fiddler of Forum?
Yeah, a couple of times.
Because I spent a long brunch with Phil Silvers at Nate Nell's Delicatessen one time, talking about how he had turned down Forum because, in his view, the script was a mess, and at that point, it probably was.
It was, yeah.
And he had turned it down to do Do Re Mi for Garson Kanin,
which I saw,
which they replaced him with Milton Berle. And just as he said Milton Berle, the door to Nate Now's opens, and on his cue comes Milton Berle, and he came over and sat with us for a while, and we talked about Forum, and we talked about It's a Mad, 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 Mad World, which, as you know, is one of my great obsessions.
Sure.
And it dawned on me that if either one of them had done Forum, that person would not have been in Mad World because they shot at the same time.
That's right.
And Burl had a fight with Gelbart, which is essentially over. Burl wanted to bring gag writers in to punch up the script. He wanted the right to bring in his gag crew to punch up the script, and Gelbart said, I didn't get out of working in live television to have people rewrite me. And Burl was gone, and then he went to Zero, who it's hard now to think of anybody else in that role.
Oh, absolutely.
So perfect. And then years later, after Phil Silvers had his nervous breakdown, they did this revival in Los Angeles of Forum, which I saw on the second night, and it was the single greatest thing I ever saw on a stage. It doesn't so shock people when I tell them that Phil Silvers was hysterically funny in the part.
Oh, Phil, yeah. The Larry Blyden one, yeah.
Yeah, Larry Blyden and Carl Ballantine.
Wow.
And this production, unlike New York, had Lou Parker and Nancy Walker in it also.
Of course.
And it had the lovely Charlene Ryan, who we were talking about earlier, before we started doing this show, who's now married to my partner Sergio. Oh. And it was just the most wonderful production. I have this theory. I read an article once about heroin addiction, how heroin addicts spend their life trying to recapture that wonderful first high. They keep wanting to recreate that experience. And I think theater buffs sometimes are like that. We go around, there was some show early in our lives that just meant the world to us. Yep. And we go around, and I've seen so many productions of Forum. I've never seen one to equal the one with Phil Silvers in it.
Yeah.
As probably you couldn't. I've seen some wonderful ones. I saw the one with Frank Ferranti not long ago in Philadelphia, which was excellent. And I've seen some pretty awful ones. And you and I went to a bunch of them, not just the one with Mathau. We went to one out in Pasadena once. We went to, you and I have seen it about 4 times together.
Yeah, the Pasadena one we talked about was Barney, Dear Barney, and E.E. Bell, and Kelly Britt. And but you know, anything in that Pasadena doesn't work. It's such a barn. Yeah,
there's certain theaters that are just. I didn't like the Schubert. I never liked seeing anything at the Schubert out here when they had it. Remember, you and I went to see Evita at the Schubert.
I sure do.
One time with my friend Valerie in it.
Our darling Valerie, yes. Who I share a birthday with her too.
Wow.
Yes, and in fact, that poster behind me there of Pearl Bailey coming down the stairs in Hello, Dolly, that was in the front of the Schubert Theater for the run of Dolly. Yeah, we got that the night that it was like Follies, the night the Schubert closed. We were invited to a party on the stage, and we all got up and did stuff. And Brad Ellis, you know
Brad Ellis, yeah, my friend Brad, yeah.
Brad was the piano player, and here we are on the stage of the Schubert Theater, a totally empty theater. And I remember I got to do Ain't Misbehavin' with Kenny Page.
Wow, that's great.
It was just wonderful.
I took the day that I first went out and met the Crofts, when I had my audition to write for Sid and Marty Krofft.
Yeah.
I met Bonnie Dorr. That night, I took Valerie to the Schubert to see Beatlemania.
Oh.
And it was an intermission. I called my phone home with that, those little record a call beepers we used to have, and I found out I got the job working for the Crofts.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah. And it was, that Schubert had a lot of history. When they did Evita there, I was working a lot for ABC, And if I had a meeting on Wednesday when they were doing the matinee of Evita, I'd go over to the Schubert and get in backstage and watch some of Evita from backstage in the wings. I thought it was a better show from backstage than it was from out front. It's not one of my favorite musicals, although Valerie was wonderful.
Oh, she was great. I love
it. But that was a great theater if you were putting on an enormous, huge show.
Yeah.
I saw Klugman and Randall do The Odd Couple there one time, and the audio was so bad that I essentially whispered every line to my date because she couldn't hear the things, and people around us were all like going, "What the else did he say?" I was actually translating for the people in our section of the theater.
Oh, that's funny.
Yeah. So
my husband just came in the room.
Oh.
And he's with the cat, but the cat already made an appearance. Here he comes.
I'm just saying, stay close to the mic.
Oh, stay close to the mic.
You know, remember Milton Berle's joke where the heckler would say to him, "You're too close to the mic," and he'd say, "How far should I be?" He says, "You got a car?" One of Berle's best jokes.
That's funny.
What shows did you see that had the other shows productions you saw that had the same effect on you that Forum had on me, that one production of Forum? Tell me about a couple of great nights in the theater.
Well, certainly Hello, Dolly, certainly Gypsy, and it was really following Davy Byrne's career all over the place. When he went into Dolly, he had got me a job at the Alvin Theater with the Gala brothers selling orange drink at the back. So I sold orange drink at the back of a lot of wonderful shows. But Dolly was the big show, and I saw the second night of that too, and it was just total joy. And Channing was brilliant. The whole original thing was brilliant. I saw every Dolly. And I think the surprise of all 7 of them, let me see if I can name them. There was Carol Channing, Ginger Rogers, Martha Ray, Betty Grable, Phyllis Diller, Pearl Bailey, and Ethel Merman. Phyllis Diller was the greatest surprise of them all.
Really?
She was terrific, and she really made it, a part of her own, and she was totally serious about it, and she wasn't doing Phyllis Diller's shtick and all that. But I was so lucky that I came along at a time when it was still the tail end of the golden age of Hollywood. I mean, I saw Do Re Mi. I saw Destry Rides Again with Andy Griffith and Dolores Gray. I saw Take Me Along with Jackie Gleason. These wonderful, wonderful shows. I saw his, Forum with Zero and Barbara Cook and Robert Preston and Mary Martin. I saw these giants, and they just don't exist anymore.
Yeah. Well.
And I was so lucky I got to work with them too, that a lot of those became my friends. I tell you, I made a lot of friends doing Zero, and it was a strange way to meet friends because they were Zero's friends who were coming to see me to tell me that I couldn't do it. And Ann Mira and Jerry Steller were 2 of those. They came early in the run, and they said, "Who is this pisher who thinks he can do Zero? Well, we're going to show him." And we became great friends through that show. You met Jerry at my house.
Yeah. Well, I was going to say, when we were back there last time, I was back with Amber. You had
Amber. You said she's not well, but I want to tell you, she is spectacular. She is not only beautiful, she is so funny and so charming and so smart. And what she sees in you is absolutely fucking beyond me.
I don't know it either.
All right. So there.
I think she needs to get her eyes. She needs to get her eyes checked. Okay.
Believe me.
Well, she's, here the greatest test of love is that she sat there with you and Steve and me and Sardes and listened to all these stories you and I were telling about people she never heard of.
That's right.
And the only people on the entire wall that she'd ever heard of were you, and caricature of you, and Penn and Teller were on the wall. And we had come from Vegas where I introduced her to Penn and Teller. So she knew them. But we went to your party, and it was a great party. I stood in the kitchen for half an hour talking to Anita Gillette.
Yeah.
And Charlotte Rae was there.
Well,
And a couple of other great people. And then we had tickets. Unfortunately, we had tickets that night for Willy Wonka, the Willy Wonka musical,
right.
which neither of us ended up liking very much, but we had the tickets, and I momentarily thought, let me just stay at the party and throw the tickets away. But we ended up, and as we were about to leave, Jerry Stiller came in. He was having trouble walking, and they helped him in, and he put him in this beautiful little easy chair there.
Right.
And I said to Amber, we're gonna stay 20 more minutes and cut it closer for the curtain at the theater. And she said, fine, if you want to, because you had a lot of pizza there. She liked the pizza you had.
That's right. You had a lot of pizza, yeah.
And I crouched next to Jerry Stiller and talked to him for 20 wonderful minutes. He was a fascinating guy.
Fascinating. Such a good actor, and people forget what a great actor he was, with such range. You know, he wasn't just Costanza's father, but he really, you know, he was Shakespearean credits. He was just marvelous, and as sweet as can be. And Anne had a thing for Steve. Oh, we used to terrible. Couldn't keep her hands off him.
Okay, now a name just popped into my head of a Dolly you didn't mention. Somebody else who played Dolly that you didn't mention.
That on Broadway?
On Broadway, yes.
Bet?
No. We went. I took Amber to see Bernadette Peters, but no, the original run of Hello Dolly. There was one other person you didn't mention.
Okay, let's see. It was Channing. It was Ginger, Martha Ray, Betty Grable, Phyllis Diller, Bibby Osterwald for 2 weeks.
That's who it. Bibby Osterwald. That's who I was going to mention.
Well, Bibby only did it for 2 weeks. She was a piece of work.
Well, she was a standby, I know, for a while.
She was, but she did it for 2 weeks in transition when they couldn't get Pearl Bailey to come in. Pearl still had 2 weeks on the road, so Bibby did it for 2 weeks. Bibby and Steve and my friend brother Gene and I had dinner at the City Diner Market in Burbank one night. And Bibby was a piece of work. Boy, she was something.
Yeah.
And she wasn't liking what was going on in the restaurant. And she said, get me the manager. And this wonderful girl came over and she said, yes. She said, well, I'm the manager. She said, well, then send me your husband. Yeah, Bibby.
William Graff wants to know, what did you think of Ginger's Dolly?
She was cute. She was a Cupid doll, and they changed a lot of. So they gave her more dancing, but they were all very legitimate in their own way. They all had their own take on it. I still think Channing was the best. You know, Channing gave it a lot of heart in the original, and then she did a couple of revivals where she was just awful.
Well, I saw a revival, and I thought she was pretty good, and I saw one of the revivals.
Depends on which year you saw it.
I don't remember. It was out here. It was in L.A. She did it at the.
She did it in '76. She did it in '84, and she did it in '93 or '4, I think. And the last one was just awful.
Really? Okay, I think I saw.
Yeah.
I'm thinking I saw '84, maybe. I don't know.
Could be.
But she was. I mean, you know. I mean, you go to some of these things, and you do it so you can say, I saw. You know, I saw Richard Burton do Camelot. I saw, Zero do this or whatever it was. You go sometimes just so you can brag that the rest of your life that you got to see someone in that role.
I saw Richard Burton in Camelot with Julie Andrews. Yeah, that was the one thing my father allowed me to have my passion, my fix, which was the theater. I would go at least once a week. And would not be afraid to go backstage. And I got to know Ray Bolger while he was doing All American. And I used to hang out with him in his dressing room, and he would come out to dinner. My father's place to hang out was a place called Toots Shores.
Oh, yeah, we've heard of that.
And Toots Shores was great. So many wonderful. So that's when I met Gleason one night, very quickly, just hello. But Alfred Hitchcock was there one night, the reddest man I've ever seen in my life. And Bennett Cerf was always at the bar. So it was a wonderful little hangout. And Davey and I used to go there with my father. Yeah, and Davy Burns died on stage, by the way.
Mm-hmm.
Show 70 Girls 70. Philadelphia, March 12th. There's that date again. Yeah, 1971.
Do you remember what theater he was in? Was it what?
It was the Forest Theater.
Oh, okay. Because I got a tour. Amber and I got a tour of the backstage at the Walnut Street Theater when we were back there, and it was just a wonderful building.
Yeah, he did the Price there.
Yeah. Let's see if we got any other questions here for people here. Ben Barkington says there are one or two interesting stories about Davy Burns in a book-length interview Candor and Ebb did about 15 years ago. There's a lot of stories about Davy Burns.
Yeah, in one of Carl Reiner's books, he dedicates a whole chapter to him. He was truly one of the most interesting people around. Of course, it was a show by Candor and Ebb that Davy died. 70 Girls was trying out, and he had replaced Eddie Foy, who was sick. And I remember driving him down to Philadelphia and going into the back of the Forest Theater when these rehearsals were going on. And, the show was about people in their 70s. And I remember Davy said, this show kind of makes you believe in death. And sure enough, a week later, he was gone.
Yeah, he came into a number of shows at the last minute replacing some. He was in The Price was like a last minute.
Well, no, he was always original in The Price.
Oh, okay.
What's
the show I'm thinking of? He went in at the last minute. It wasn't The Price. It was one that he was like hired. Pat Hingle replaced him, I think.
No. Here's the thing about The Price. I used to hang out. The Price rehearsed at the New Amsterdam Roof Theater. There was a wonderful theater on the roof of the New Amsterdam, and I would pick up Davy and drive him after the rehearsals, and I would start getting there earlier and earlier and hanging out. Ulu Grossbard was the director, and Arthur Miller was there. And boy, they just did not get along. And Jack Warden was in the middle of it, and Jack was playing the cop. And all of a sudden, I got to rehearsal one day, and some days I would get there first and just kind of wait for everybody, and I became a presence in the room. And Pat Hingle was there instead of Jack Warden. But what was interesting is Pat Hingle seemed to be up in the part. So I had a feeling that this had been going on for a while. But if Ulu Grossbard said, do it this way, Arthur Miller would come and say, no, do it that way. So pretty much Grossbard stepped aside and let Arthur Miller take over. And I'll never forget, in Philadelphia at the Walnut Street Theater, it was just before they came back into town. Arthur Miller was a very sweet man. So I remember standing there, and he kind of sidled up next to me, and he said, this was after the matinee, and he said, so what do you think? And I thought, you're fucking Arthur Miller. What the fuck are you asking me what I think for? I'm a schmuck from Brooklyn. I don't have opinions. You're goddamn Arthur Miller.
All right.
I ran into him one night at Gallagher's in New York, and I said, Mr. Miller, do you remember me? And it's funny, I had a copy of The Price with me, which had just been published in the Saturday Evening Post. And so he said, do you want to have a drink? I said, sure. So I'm sitting at the bar with Arthur Miller, and this man came up to him and said, excuse me, are you Arthur Miller? And Miller said, yeah. He said, well, you probably don't remember me. I'm so-and-so from Rasmus High School. We went to college together, to high school together. Oh, well, boy, that was a long time ago. Nice to see you. And all right. And the guy looked at me and said, so what have you been doing? And he said, well, I've been writing. He said, oh, that's a tough profession. Have you had any success with it? And he said, yeah. He said, I wrote a couple of plays. He said, anything I might know? He said, well, yeah, one was called Death of a Salesman. And then I wrote The Price. And the guy said, oh, my God, you're Arthur Miller.
My friend Stu Showstack has a question here.
Hi, Stu.
Did Jim meet Lucy for the first time when she appeared in Wildcat? And how did that become a friendship? Now, I know this story. It wasn't you didn't become friends with her till years later.
Yeah,
but
I think Stu knows this story too, and he probably heard it from Lucy.
All right.
By the way, Stu, Lucy adored you. She absolutely adored you. I know you did a lot of stuff for her, but she would always speak very, very fondly of you. So it's nice to see you here. Okay, here's the Lucy story. My father got tickets for me to see her in Wildcat because I was just the biggest Lucille Ball fan. Saturday matinee, she was just wonderful. And at the end, at the Alvin Theater, I said, well, all right, I'm going to stick around, see if I can get her autograph. So I look around and stood in the back, and all of a sudden she's on the stage. The curtain was up, and she's going from right to left, and she's in a blue dressing gown, and I ran down that aisle so fast, I almost flipped into the orchestra pit. I said, Miss Ball, can I have your autograph? And she said, no autographs today, sorry, and she was off the stage. So now I take a class with the Sherwood Oaks Experimental College, 1977, and Lucy gave a 6-week seminar. And so I was at every class for 6 weeks. And at the end, I still had my Wildcat program. So I said, all right, I'm going to get her to sign it. So I stood in line, and there was a lot of people standing in line waiting for her. And I got about 2 away, and Gary Morton came in and said, sorry, we got to go. So now I don't have the. Now we switch to 1988, and I've written this play called The Lucky O'Learys. I sent it to Kate Hepburn. She said, oh, I think Lucille would be very good for this. And I said, do you have her address? She said, no, and hung up. So I gave it to a fellow named Merrill Karp, who knew Lucy, and he said, send it to her and, mention my name, mention you play backgammon. And so I sent her the play. She was looking to do something with Audrey Meadows. And this was a play about 2 elderly sisters who had a sibling rivalry. So Steve and I found out where she lived. We put it in an envelope and put it in her mailbox at 1000 North Roxbury Drive. And 2 days later, the phone rang, and it was Lucy. She said, well, you made me laugh. Can you come over and talk about the show? And I said, well, yeah. So I go over to talk to her about it. And she opened the door herself. I'm scared to death. Here is my idol, the lady who taught me everything about comedy that there is. She said, well, come on in. We'll play backgammon. We went to the back house. She sat down. I sat down opposite her, and crack, I broke her chair. I mean, it was a crack, and I didn't know whether to freeze or just say I had broken. I said, Miss Ball, oh, call me Lucy. And, well, Lucy, I just broke your chair. She said, well, get another one. I said, all right. So I got another one, sat down, crack. I broke that one too. I said, why don't I get that one? That one looks sturdy. She said, the other 2 look sturdy too. So now I have broken 2 chairs. She tells me a joke, which I'm not going to repeat because it's just too dirty. But it was that joke that cemented our friendship, because I repeated it to her in a different way, and she fell on the floor laughing. And I knew at that point I could make Lucille Ball laugh. And I knew that was important to her. She had been sick. She was kind of down. And we spent 5 hours together. We never talked about the play once. Talked about everything but. So at the end of the day, she said, can you come back tomorrow? And I said, yes, but tomorrow's my birthday. So if I come back, you have to give me a present. She said, well, maybe I'll give you a chair. So the next day I go back, and we are playing backgammon, and she gets up. I think I have it here. I do. She gets up, and she comes back to the table, and she's got a little box with green foil on it and a card and a candle with a hot cross bun with a candle. And she's singing happy birthday to you. And I started to cry. And she said, what are you crying for? And I said, well, did Lucille Ball ever sing happy birthday to you? So I opened up the box, and this was in it. I don't know if you can see her face there.
It's a Lucy watch.
It's a
love Lucy, it says on it, I think.
So that was what she gave me, and the note said, dear Jim, I will always have time for you. And from that day, I spent just about every day with her until she died.
Yeah, I remember a couple of times you came by and asked me to go with you over to hers, and I couldn't get away.
I remember.
But, I met her once at a production of she and Gary sat next to my then girlfriend Christine and I at one of Lily Tomlin's performances at the Huntington Hartford.
Right, I remember that.
Yeah, and we're sitting there. She came in, and we were like second row, and we were sitting there. And at intermission, a lady usher came over and leaned over and said, "Excuse me, Ms. Tomlin would like to know if it's okay to introduce you in the audience in the curtain speech." And Lucy turned to me and said, "Are you somebody important?" And I said, I think she's talking to you." And so Lucy said, "Fine, it's okay. Tell her I'd be honored, please." So the lady goes away. So then I turned to Lucy and I said, "It's a tradition at a Lily Tomlin concert. At the end, she comes out and she's going to introduce me and Christine, and she'll introduce you and Gary, because she comes out and introduces all the heterosexuals in the audience." And Lucy began laughing. That laugh, and I heard it in person. And
it was an easy laugh.
So then at the end of the curtain speech, Lily comes out, and the audience has given her 18 standing ovations, well deserved, and she says, "Save the applause. Finally, you've got to use it we've got in the house a show business legend, one of the most important people to ever work in comedy." And she makes like this minute-long speech, which does not reveal who it is, and does not even reveal the gender of who it is. She's saying somebody who had this effect on everybody, whose work in comedy set a standard, goes on and on about this. And just when she's getting close to the moment she's going to reveal who it is, a voice in the back of the house yells out, "Hurry up and introduce me already." And it was Rip Taylor who was in the back. And Lily goes, "Shut up, Rip. It's Lucille Ball." And the place exploded.
Oh, how funny.
And Lucy takes a moment. Everybody's looking around. Where the hell is she? And she gets up. I was sitting next to Gary after the intermission, and Lucy was one over there. And the people around us, nobody had spotted her. She had a scarf over her hair. And the people around were shocked, like, "Oh my God, Lucille Ball has been sitting among us for the entire show, and we didn't know it." And there was the ovation was astounding, of course.
Oh, sure.
And then some security people came in to help Lucy and Gary get out, to protect them, and they took us out with them. Christine and I, we kind of piggybacked on I think the ushers thought we were part of their party, and we got out with her. And I just said, said to go outside, and that
night in Florida, I was part of her party, and boy, the troop movement that you go through to get out of a place. I mean, the Secret Service or the security, they form a team. I was standing next to James Brolin, and I said, "Do you do this every time?" And he said, "Oh yeah, you'll get used to it." But I'll tell you a funny addendum to the Streisand story. About 3 or 4 months before that, we went to see Light in the Piazza. Steve and I went to see Light in the Piazza at Lincoln Center. And so the lights went down, and there were 4 seats in front of us at Lincoln Center. And I don't know if it's stadium seating there, so you can just really see down in front of you. And I said, "Oh, good, 4 empty seats. We'll have a better view." Well, sure enough, the lights went down, and 4 people came in and sat. Well, about halfway through the first act, I keep looking down, and I realized the person sitting in front of Steve, who's next to me, is Barbra Streisand, and James Brolin's in front of me. So same thing, just at the end of Act 1, before the lights come up, the 4 of them get up, out they go. Act 2 begins. They come back. Streisand is sitting this way from me, and I can look down. Her cell phone goes off. She reaches in, and there's a picture of her dog on the cell phone, and she's real nervous, and she puts it back in. So now we cut to me sitting with her in the dressing room, and the dog walks in, and she says, "Oh, this is my beloved Sammy. Isn't Sammy cute?" And I said, "Yeah, you've got a picture of him on your cell phone." How do you know that? I said, "Well, I was sitting behind you at Light in the Piazza when your phone went off, and I could see it." She said, "Oh, what'd you think of the show?" You want to change the subject very quickly.
Yes. We have, speaking of great comic talents in the audience, we have one in our audience right
I'll
now.
be the judge of that.
We have first we have from Frank Ferrani sends greetings. Hello to Zero from Groucho.
Hello, Frank.
And then we also have Frank wrote, I'll never forget hanging out in 1989 after a performance of Groucho at the Pasadena Playhouse in the company of Jim, Charles Pierce, and Charles Nelson Riley. At 26, I had no spelled wrong idea of the greatness.
I got to tell you, I was sitting at home once. Frank, it's great to see you. I was telling Mark before, that was a terrible time, that show we did together in and where the fuck did we do it? You know, I also saw you do a Life in Review off Broadway because my friends Richard Carruthers and Dennis Hennessy had produced it, and you were just wonderful. That show we did in Pasadena was a bad time, and if there was anything that I did, I must be forgiven for it because I think you're a marvelous, marvelous talent. But yes, I do remember that. Wait a minute now. I do remember that. Almost lost everything. Yeah, I was home one night, and the phone rang, and it was Charles Nelson Riley on the phone. Wait a minute now. I've got some problems going on here. Oh. Here I am.
Would you like a stunt man for the rest of this show?
Yeah, but my IT person just came running in.
Oh, okay.
I think it's all right now.
This is a Charles Nelson Riley story?
It's a little bit of a two people story.
Okay, here's Charles Nelson Riley and you.
So I'm sitting home alone. No, I was sitting with Steve. What am I saying alone? I'm sitting with Steve and the phone rings. Hello, Jimmy, it's Charles. Yeah, Charles. And he started to go off on something, and there was a beep, call waiting. And I said, Charles, hold on for a second. And I said, hello, Jimmy, it's Rippy. It was Rip Taylor.
Thought they were the same person.
Well, I said to Steve, I said, I got the two biggest queens in Hollywood on the phone at the same time. And all Steve did was say, 3. I was the third one.
Yes, I got it. Yeah, okay.
Rip asked me to direct his one-person show. We went to the Sportsman's Lodge one morning, and he had the script. And he said, Jimmy, you're the only one who can direct this show for me. And I said, Rippy, from the bottom of my heart, I would rather have hot needles poked in my eyes than direct you in a show. And he thought I was kidding, but I was not.
Yeah, he was. I never got to know Charles. I heard so many stories about the guy. Dick Van Dyke told the story that Dick was in Bye Bye Birdie. Charles Nelson Riley's first 3 Broadway shows were Bye Bye Birdie, How to Succeed in Business, and Hello Dolly. Did anybody ever have 3 smash hits in a row like that? Anyway, so when Dick, Charles was his understudy. Charles was filling in for Paul Lynde a lot because Paul Lynde had other jobs, but then he understudied Dick. When Dick came out to Hollywood to shoot the pilot for the Dick Van Dyke Show, Charles Nelson Riley went on in his place. So Dick came back from the trip one night, and he was too late to go to take over in the show, but he thought it'd be fun to see it from out front. So he got some tickets, and he went and he sat in the audience. And I said, well, how was he in the part? He says, well, he was pretty good with the talking. But like for the songs, he would sing mostly like yada da 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 da, put on a happy face, yada da da da. He didn't remember any lyrics from any of the songs, and he did them all that way. And very wonderful thing there. We're gonna take a few more questions here. Let's see what else does people want to know about. Did we cover Lucy adequately? I mean, you were with Lucy so much. There must be other stories about Lucy you wanted to tell. You wrote a book. Tell people about the book you wrote about Lucy.
I wrote a book called Lucy in the Afternoon. I just wanted to. There was a friend of mine in New York who was such a fan of hers, and every day when I came home, he would call and say, "What did she talk about today?" So I found myself making notes, and I found these stories were wonderful. So when she died, I thought, what am I going to do with this? And my agent at the time said, I think you got a book in you. And I started to write. I wrote one chapter, and William Morrow said, we'll publish it. I wish I could rewrite the book now. There's so much. I'm going to go and tell you something that I've never told anybody before. I despised Gary Morton. He was not a nice man, and he didn't treat her well. I hold him partially responsible for her death because she didn't want to go back to work, and he kind of made her go back to work, and it was a horrible experience for her, that life with Lucy. When she left, she told me she picked up her makeup case, and people turned their back as she left the studio. He would come home. Hi, Diane. Hiya, Morty. She used the name Diane Belmont when she was a model, and he was born Morty Goldapper. And I just think he used her. That's all. She did option the Lucky O'Learys as a TV series. He optioned it for 20th Century Fox. And we went over to make the deal with a fellow named Stu Sheslow over at
I remember Stu Sheslow, yeah.
And we drove through in Gary's Bentley so he could show the power. And he said, now they're going to give you $5,000 for this option. I said, okay. He said, you may not get it right away. It'll have to come through Lucille Ball Productions. I said, okay. So I knew at that point, I thought he was trying to steal the money from me. And indeed, afterwards, when Lucy said, have you been paid yet? I said, no. And he kind of got and I was paid almost immediately after that by Lucille Ball Production. She used to say to me, Desi used to, womanize, and I never knew where he was or who he was with. Said with Gary, he's on the golf course, and I know that. Well, of course, a few months after Lucy died, Gary married his golf pro, Susan. So he may have been on and when I published the book, I sent the galley to Gary because I wanted him to see it was a love letter to her. I adored her. She told me a couple of things that would make your head spin that I could have put in the book that I didn't. But Gary called me and he was out of control, angry, and absolutely said the most hackneyed phrase that ever was, "You're through in show business." And that was it. And he frightened me a little bit, but he was not a nice man. I did an interview with George Putnam. Remember George Putnam?
Yes, sure. Yes.
Interviews. I went down to be with George Putnam for a radio thing. And he said, "What'd you think of Gary Morton?" And I said, "George, to be honest, I didn't like him very much." He said, "Good for you. I met him and took a permanent pass."
Wow.
So
you and Stu Shostak have to talk one of these days.
Yeah.
All right.
A lot of stories.
Okay. Let's see if there's any other good questions here we should get to. If a few more come in here. I was curious, Rob. I was curious about Lucky O'Learys and how that all panned out, and if it could have still been developed without Lucy.
Yeah, it probably could have. In fact, Stu Sheslow asked me and paid me to rewrite it into a movie, and I did. But it never. It's a very good play, and it gets done around. But no, the other parts of it, the TV movie version have never gone to fruition. And Lucy didn't do it with Audrey Meadows. She wanted to do it with Audrey Meadows, but then Lucy had a stroke, and she couldn't work anymore. Even though she thought it might be fun.
Trevor Kimball said, "Wonderful Lucy book, very funny and touching."
Thank you, Trevor.
That's nice. And let's see if there's any other questions here we should get to. Now, Ben Varkinen asked, when is Mr. Brochure writing his book? You are writing a book.
I am writing a book, but nobody wants to publish it. It's very hard to get a publisher. So yeah, I'm not famous enough, although I talk about a lot of very famous people. So I don't know, maybe posthumously. Okay.
Well, this is all great. Jim, it's I don't talk enough. We don't see each other enough, okay, fine. That's good. Okay, we'll do this.
Once a year is fine with me.
Well, we were at Sardi's with Amber and Steve that time, and I thought, wow, this is as theater as you can get. Sardi's afternoon. You were ordering off the actors menu. I didn't know they had an actors menu there.
Yeah,
but,
they have to know you.
and I just I kind of like you more in New York than I do when you were in LA in a way, because you seem like more in your natural habitat.
Yeah, yeah.
Surrounded with all those theaters around us and on the streets.
I live in the middle of the theater district, kind of. So yeah, no, LA was a great place, and I miss the people. I don't miss LA. I don't miss driving, certainly, and God, I hate warm weather.
Well, we're going to have it someplace everywhere soon. Anyway, this has been a lot of fun, Jim, and I thank you for doing it. And I want my special thanks to Steve for helping out, getting this all set up. And I want to thank Leo Katz for stealing several of your scenes.
He did.
Tonight.
Where'd he go? Oh, there. He's on the bed. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Appearance for tonight. Mark, I love you. You're a very talented, dear, wonderful, funny guy, and I count my blessings that you're one of my friends.
Well, I count my blessings that you're one of my friends. We've been like 40 years now.
Yeah.
So
let's end it now.
That's right. That's it. Fine. It's the last time we'll ever speak to each other until the next time. Anyway, for those of you who came in the middle of this whole discussion, this will rerun on YouTube forever. In about 5 minutes, you can probably see the beginning of it again and go through it and watch it from there. And you'll see that several of the questions that were asked in the last half hour here were answered in the first half hour. So I didn't pick on them. I'm going to be doing these every Tuesday for the foreseeable future. This coming Saturday, I'm doing another one of my Cartoon Voices panels. We got through this. The last time I did one of these things live, they were burning cars down the street, and my internet went out. I was doing a cartoon voice panel, and we had to stop it because the internet.
I heard about that.
Crazy.
Say hi to Alan Oppenheimer for me.
I will. Yes, Alan Oppenheimer, an amazing man who I saw on Broadway. I saw him backstage at Sunset Boulevard. Yeah, George Hearn introduced us to him. There's an amazing, lovely man.
Lord.
And great stuff. Thank you all for tuning in. Okay, thank you all for tuning in. What? Okay, yes, that's Steve. Yes, Steve staying. Steve and Jim stayed up late for this because they're on New York time.
Come here.
Come on in, Steve. Steve, hello. Thank you for participating in all this and making it possible.
I couldn't do it if it wasn't for him.
You two, Steve, I knew Jim before you did. And I knew Jim.
Why didn't you warn me?
I knew Jim when he was kind of figuring out what he wanted to do with his life. He was going back and forth between being a director and being a writer and being an actor and things like that. And I cannot now imagine the two of you not together. I cannot imagine him without you. The two of you fit together so well. But I won't tell anybody that. You guys are amazing. Anyway, thank you all for this. Goodbye, everybody. Goodbye, everybody who tuned in. Stay there, Jim and Steve, while I let us off here.